part of me is just sort of a bit that we're going to enter this period of about 23 days of political speculation about what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. And actually, I think that's a terrible way to make policy. But sort of stepping back a little bit, tax is really just a political philosophy in numbers. And I think what's useful to think about is how the Chancellor's speech today might compare to Nigel Farage's speech yesterday. Actually, he set out his economic policy was largely focused on fiscal policy. And there was one thing they had in common. They share the same end goal, and that was slightly surprising, actually. Both of them say government shouldn't spend more than they collect. It was orientated around a goal of fiscal responsibility. That's the first time we've heard Nigel Farage say that, actually. That was new, and that was a recent development for sort of someone who sort of brandished himself against the system, so leaning into the mainstream. But there was a difference about how to get there. How should we become fiscally responsible? And Nigel Farage was arguing the Reform Party would enact austerity Mark II. We would cut spending drastically. And Rachel Reeves says, no, we want those services, and therefore we're going to have to pay for them, and we're going to increase tax. And so there are two different messages there. Farage is saying, in this rocky economic period, it's survival of the fittest. Whereas Rachel Reeves is saying, in this rocky economic period, we're going to need all our reserves of mutuality. And if you are going to read between the lines, I think she said two things today. I think she said, taxes that most people pay, they're probably going to go up. But taxes the people at the top pay, they're going to go up even more. And I think that's probably what we're going to see. Taxes really is a collective contribution we all make to get some protection and some services back from the state. And she talked about the NHS, but she also did actually interestingly think about the cost of living crisis and defence, hostile actors. It's quite a kind of Hobbesian argument almost. It's quite an old school argument, actually. We all do this thing. It's actually, when you think about it, tax and spend is, I mean, it's democracy's coolest feature, right? 70 million of us chuck in money for the purse to have the roads and trains and schools and armies that we need. I think that's something interesting about that.
And we love the NHS.
I think when people talk about productivity in the private and public sector, they are comparing apples and oranges. I work in the public and the private sector. And overwhelmingly, if you work in the public sector, you interact with other people. You meet sort of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, sometimes 100 people a day. Your work, by definition, involves conversations with other humans, frankly, usually strangers who are using services like education and hospitals. Productivity improvements in that setting is dramatically different to the private sector, where most people work behind a screen. It's very different. The nature of the work is fundamentally different. If you want to talk about productivity in these two different sectors, you have to have two different productivity strategies. I'm not saying you can't improve productivity in the public sector, but you have to be careful about shifting a ward from sort of one nurse looking after 4 people to one nurse looking after 8 people. Welfare, I do think welfare needs reform, but I think we need to be clear on the assumptions here we're making, right? Underlying, I think, a lot of what the comments have come so far, and Ms Badenoch's speech this morning, is this idea that people on welfare have this sort of life of Riley or sit on the couch all day. And that's just frankly not true. I think it reeks of people who actually just don't know anyone on working health benefits.
And I do know many people, and that is absolutely true for many.
But that is not the reason. The reason they are not in work is not because the welfare is so generous that they can just sit around and watch television all day. And I think
it's because there are no jobs as well.
Well, if you go with that assumption, then you hack welfare. It's a bit of a hit and hope strategy, assuming that actually what that's going to do is going to sharpen people's minds and push them into work that's good for them and productive for them. It's probably not. It's probably going to accentuate a survival mindset. They might deepen into the sofa, in your words. And I think that's different. I think what we need to do is to help people into work.
Yes, we need a more human system. So listen, let me
finish. Because how do you help people?
And then let Danny
helping people into work, it's about giving them a right to try work. You know, so say I'm on welfare benefits and I want to try going back to work. If I do that, I'm going to lose all my benefits. That's wild. It might be too early. I might need another week or two. I think small reforms like that can actually add up. It can take people off the benefits in a controlled and planned way, and we can get to a more sustainable. But I think we all agree on welfare reform. I think we disagree on how to get there.
When you say welfare reform, do you mean that less money has to be put into it?
I do think ideally we should spend less money on working age benefits. I think that's a sign of a good and healthy society, and too many people have gone on to benefits over the past few years. But I think also it means we've got to kick the tires on pensions. When we talk about welfare and we talk about social security, we spend more on pensions than we spend on working age people. And it is interesting.
What about the triple lock? Do you think that needs to
I think it's antiquated, and I think it's time for it to change. And it's interesting the Conservative Party didn't say anything about it, and it's interesting that Nigel Farage did say something about it.
Okay, right. What do you think is happening here? I mean, in terms of, if you look at the polls, there is no doubt that Nigel Farage and Danny's party, it's chiming with people.
Yeah, the tides are changing for sure, and it's quite hard to make total sense of it. Kemi Badenoch this morning, I think, said it's an existential threat to all parties. I think she's wrong on that. I think it's an existential threat to the Reform Party. I think to the Conservative Party. So I think Reform are...
Do you think Reform's hit its
No, I don't
heights?
think so. I think it can go higher. I think it is cannibalising the Conservatives. I don't think that means the Conservatives are over, but it's stealing its clothes, it's stealing its branding, it's stealing its voters, stealing its MPs. I think the challenge for parties of the left is different. It's not an existential crisis, it's more of an identity crisis. Can the Labour Party keep its agenda relevant in the face of altogether more inflammatory and more ideological opponents? You know, when it was Blair and Brown versus Cameron, Howard, IDS, politics, it was heated, but it was mainly about problem solving. It was about what works over ideological differences. Both sides agreed on a set of fundamentals about liberal democracy, globalisation, free markets, and the contest took place within those. But those fundamentals are exactly the fundamentals that are now in flux, that the Reform Party actually defines itself against, actually.
Yeah.
And
so I don't think the problem
has changed the nature of political contest.
Danny?
So this has been a fascinating description of like how politics is practiced in society today, and it's totally different. So Kevin's response there was totally technocratic, talking about bond yields and borrowing costs, and Danny's answer was entirely moral. And I think that's part of the allure. People are not voting for the Reform Party because they're moderates. They're voting for them because they're radicals. They're proposing a new set of ideas about how the world works and what the role of government is within that. There's an attraction to that, and that is what Reform is about. It's a radical party by all definitions. And what's interesting about that is it shifted the terrain of politics onto the battle of ideas. In a rapidly changing world, in a rapidly changing society, one resource matters above all else, and that is political imagination. Reform does wield that with ruthless effect, but the Labour Party can too, and that's what I think they should do.